Hi guys, so today we're going to start chapter 4. We're going to go over chapter 4.1, which is about energy, in chapter 4.2, which is an introduction to photosynthesis. So we are now focusing in on our objective right down here, that we are now looking at the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration and how they interact in a dynamic ecosystem. And now I know that sounds like a lot, so we are going to break that down step by step and see where it takes us. So our vocab word for 4.1 is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Chemical energy gets stored in a molecule called ATP. This molecule transfers energy from the breakdown of food molecules to cell processes. Energy that is carried by ATP does get released when when that last phosphate is broken off the end of an ATP molecule. This is our molecule of ATP. So we have adenine, which is a nucleic acid attached to a ribose, which is a sugar. Anytime you see OSE, you're typically looking at a sugar. When this phosphate here gets broken off right here, we release energy. And then when that bond is rebuilt, it stores energy. That's for a few different reasons. The first reason is that the bonding site that holds that second and third phosphate together is unstable and very easily broken. It's also very easily rebuilt. So the removal of that third phosphate group releases energy, which happens during a chemical reaction. When the phosphate group is removed, energy is released. And when that molecule is rebuilt from ADP, which is a lower energy molecule, when a phosphate group is re-added, it actually stores energy. So I really like this graphic because it shows us when we put energy in with ADP, we get ATP. When energy comes out, we get ADP and a phosphate group that can be re-added whenever energy is available again. So we have two cycles kind of happening at the same time. Organisms break down carbon-based molecules in order to produce ATP. I know my picture here is behind our screen. The food we eat does not directly contain ATP. However, it does contain macromolecules that can be broken down into ATP. One of the functions of the digestive system of consumers or animals that must eat other organisms is to break down those food into smaller molecules that can be used to make ATP. Different foods generate a different level of ATP. Let's take a look at what types of foods create the most amount of ATP. Carbohydrates do not create the most amount of energy. However, they are the most abundant and most commonly broken down to make ATP. Think about what you had for lunch. I'm sure it had carbohydrates in it, whether you knew it or not. Carbohydrates include fructose, sugar from fruits, sucrose, glucose, and then your typical carbs that you normally think of: breads, pastas, potatoes. The breakdown of a simple sugar glucose, which is the one that we are going to look at moving forward, yields about 36 molecules of ATP per single glucose molecule. Hundreds of glucose molecules go in to make up 1 gram of sugar. So think of how much ATP you are actually getting from that. This is your simple sugar glucose. Lipids, healthy fats, store the most amount of energy. About 80% of the nutrients in your body and energy in your body come from healthy fats. Healthy fats are like avocados and nuts, nut butters, guacamole, olive oils. Those are all healthy fats. When you have a healthy fat, you're able to break down them into about 146 molecules of ATP. However, Carbohydrates are still more abundant in our diet and give us more ATP because of how we're consuming them. For each hydrogen here, we can usually create about 1 molecule of ATP. So we see this crazy amount of hydrogen. Right here is why fats don't always break down as abundantly. A lot of the fats that we eat are actually not healthy fats, and they're very bad for us. So whenever they have this double bond, it's a little bit harder to build and break down, and you can see there's one less hydrogen on each carbon. Proteins make just about the same amount as carbohydrates, maybe a little less, probably more like 30. And that's because proteins that we eat daily are not used to build energy. Most of the amino acids in proteins are used to make more amino acids, make DNA, make RNA. So less of it is used to make energy and more of it is used for cellular functions. We have 4 different types of proteins. They're broken up in a way that I kind of like to almost imagine them. Our amino acids, or our simple proteins, are like alphabet letters. Our tertiary or secondary structures, like alpha helixes, are our words. Our tertiary structures are sentences, and our paragraphs are quaternary structures. So without alpha letters, we can't have words. Without words, we can't have sentences. Without sentences, we can't form paragraphs. Plants still need ATP, although plants do not move as much. They still perform cellular respiration to build energy. They do make their own food, so they are producers, and they make their own food through a process called photosynthesis. There are a select few types of organisms that do not rely on the sun directly or indirectly as their primary source of energy. These types of organisms live at the bottom of the ocean where sunlight does not reach, and they have formed and adapted to other means of making their own food in order to survive. This is called chemiosynthesis. This is the process by which some organisms use chemical energy instead of light energy to make energy storing carbon-based molecules like glucose. They will use radiation in the form of heat energy or chemical energy from the core of the earth in order to produce their own food. It's very similar into the process that makes ATP for photosynthesis. However, the raw materials that are going into the system and into the products are a little bit different than that of photosynthesis. We're not going to talk a whole lot more about chemosynthesis. I'd just like to make you guys aware that this is an availability for organisms that do not get any sunlight. A quick overview of photosynthesis. Organisms that use photosynthesis to produce their own food are producers. So that means they are making their own food. And I don't mean what I do in the kitchen at night. That food has already technically been made by either plant or animal. So they actually, in their cells, are producing their own food. We cannot lay out in a field like SpongeBob can to photosynthesize. That's something only plants have the ability to do. Photosynthesis is the process that captures energy from sunlight to make sugars that store chemical energy. One thing I really want you guys to take away from this is that photosynthesis does not make energy. Photosynthesis makes food that stores energy. The energy for almost all organisms in the world begins as sunlight. If you think about your diet, somewhere along that road, whether you have consumed a photosynthetic organism or you're consuming an animal that had consumed a photosynthetic organism. Sunlight comes in many different forms, ultraviolet, radiation, microwaves, and visible light. Photosynthetic organisms mostly use the visible light spectrum in order to produce their own food. Here's a fun fact that I'm sure you guys didn't know. Leaves are not actually green. Leaves are not green. The chlorophyll inside of the leaves are what is actually green. That chlorophyll absorbs the visible light spectrum of red, orange, and yellow, blue, purples, and violets. They reflect the green color. In the absence of chlorophyll, like we see in the autumn, we are seeing the true color of the leaves at that point in time in the absence of chlorophyll, because chlorophyll is a green pigment chemical. There are two different types of chlorophyll, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. They absorb either side of green on the visible light spectrum. Neither absorb that green light. The green color comes from the chlorophyll that reflects out the green color wavelength that we receive in our rods and cones in our eye to determine what color we are seeing. Photosynthesis occurs within the chloroplast. Chloroplasts are the membrane-bound organelle where photosynthesis takes place. They have two main pieces to the chloroplast: the grana, which are the stacks of thylakoids, and the stroma, which is the liquid around the thylakoids. Thylakoids help speed up the reaction of photosynthesis by containing chlorophyll and being a vector of where photosynthesis can take place. Photosynthesis happens in two different phases. First is the light-dependent reaction. And if we break down the term photosynthesis, photo means light, synthesis means to make. So it makes sense that the first part of the reaction requires sunlight. In this step, chlorophyll absorbs the energy from sun. The energy gets transferred along the thylakoid membrane. Water gets broken down and oxygen gets released as a byproduct. Remember, plants will take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, where humans and animals take in oxygen and give off carbon dioxide. The energy gets then carried along the thylakoid membrane and transferred to molecules that are energy carriers, such as ATP. The second part of the reaction is the light-independent reaction. This can be happening at the same time as the light-dependent reaction, or it could happen after the fact. This uses energy created in the light-dependent reaction to generate our organic molecules. Carbon dioxide is added to a cycle of chemical reactions that build larger molecules. Energy from the light-dependent reaction gets used in this piece. And a molecule of simple sugar gets formed. The sugar is usually a glucose sugar, stores some of the energy that was captured in sunlight as a food. Again, photosynthesis makes food that stores energy, not makes energy. This is the reaction to photosynthesis. I can promise you, I will show you this every day. I will write it on the board. I will record it all the time. This is such an important reaction for you guys to know. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water with light will yield in the chlorophyll 1 molecule of sugar and 6 molecules of oxygen. This reaction can be written 2 ways. Going forward, in the way it's written right now, is photosynthesis. But going backwards, without light and not in the chlorophyll, is actually cellular respiration. And that's why I'm going to continue to make you guys aware of this equation. That is an overview of energy and photosynthesis, and we will pick up with photosynthesis in detail in our next video.